Welcome to the Real Texas Radio Podcast with your host, Bronin. And happy 5th day of dry January if you're celebrating. But who's counting? Today on the show, I am going to be discussing Dallas's Office of the Inspector General. Is it a DOGE or is it a DUD? You be the judge. And before we get going, please make sure to give me a like from wherever you are streaming and follow me on X at RTR_Bronin, RTR_Bronin. All right now, you're listening to the Real Texas Radio Podcast. I'm your host, Bronin, just a fed-up taxpayer bringing you all of your Texas, local, and national news. Okay, so I'm going to try to do a deep dive here on the Office of the Inspector General in Dallas. So the office, it has existed, I think, for about 5 years, and its purpose is to be the watchdog for City Hall, for the City Council, for city staff. The Office of the Inspector General is supposed to monitor ethics violations, waste, fraud, abuse, and they're supposed to be the stewards of taxpayer trust. And right now, the office, it has 7 people. And they claim the current Inspector General, who is the third one in the position in less than 1 year, third different guy, Jacob Eliason. He claims that he needs the office to be staffed with 11 people to be fully staffed. So he currently has 3 full-time investigators. He'd like a total of 5, and he'd like to hire another lawyer. And the Inspector General is himself a lawyer, so I'm going to get into that. But let's back up. So why do we have this Office of the Inspector General? Well, it used to be folded into the Dallas City Attorney's Office, and then Eric Johnson, the mayor, he claimed several years ago that he wanted there to be a greater emphasis on good ethics in Dallas city government. And I think in 2021, a report surfaced. I'm sure some consultant was paid an ungodly sum to produce this report that stated, the city of Dallas needs to have this robust and thoroughly staffed and completely separate independent Office of the Inspector General to be the watchdog of the city. And this, of course, was in the wake of 2 Dallas city councilors who were charged with felonies, basically taking bribes from developers, and at least one developer was charged. And I'm not even going to get into that whole morass because it is a mess. But ultimately, the feds got involved there. They were federally prosecuted, these city councilors. And one of them, I think, served at least a few years in jail. I'm not sure about the developer. I know one of the developers, last name Hamilton, he ended up appealing and getting his conviction overturned. I'm not sure if he spent time in jail first. That was just last year in 2025 because the judge, go figure, she didn't read the correct instructions to the jury. And so he had a retrial and then the jury acquitted him. So I don't know how many millions of dollars it costs to drag that investigation and trial over more than 5 years. And then, but ultimately, it just seemed, I don't want to say it was a complete waste, but if you're looking at maybe tens of thousands of dollars, if that much, that the developer passed on allegedly to these counselors versus the millions of dollars it cost to prosecute the fraud, then I don't know, was it worth it? But here's the whole point. The feds stepped in there. The feds were able to get the retribution for the public. And then one of the city councilors, Carolyn Davis.
I thought they died. Are they still around?
No, President Trump. She is not still around. She died tragically in a car accident. And so I don't even know if she was sentenced, or she certainly didn't spend any time in jail. And I think that was a totally separate incident. So now, here we are in the early days of 2026. We have this Office of the Inspector General, and we started out 2025 with an Inspector General, Bart Beavers or Bevers. And I'm not sure when he was hired, but at the start of 2025, he was in the office making over $200,000 per year. And he was ultimately terminated by the Dallas City Council because and let's make that clear. So this Office of the Inspector General, which is supposed to be separate and independent and, totally angelic, and this do-gooder public watchdog agency, they're paid by the city, and they are hired by the city. The Inspector General is hired. Ultimately, his position needs to be approved. His hire needs to be approved by the Dallas City Council. And likewise, the Dallas City Council can also vote. You just need 8 out of the 15, including the mayor, to vote to fire this person, which has happened twice in 2025, because the replacement for this Bart Beavers, who is now suing the city for wrongful termination, his replacement, last name Mankey, sorry, I don't recall the first name, I don't have it in front of me. He was hired even though he was unqualified for the position, because you have to be an attorney to be the Inspector General. So is this all by design? Is the Dallas City Council, are they intentionally sabotaging this position because they don't want it to be effective? I don't know. Well, I will say this, Kara Mendelson, she voted to approve Mankey just fewer than 3 months before she voted to fire him because he was unqualified. I don't think Kara Mendelson is trying to intentionally sabotage this office. And I think if she actually saw a real problem with his appointment, then she would have spoken up. But apparently everybody missed it. City councilors, city attorney, city secretary, the mayor, city staff, the press. None of them were able to see. Apparently, nobody went to this guy's LinkedIn, Mankey, or looked at his resume and saw that he wasn't an attorney, even though it is now enshrined in the Dallas City Charter, this Office of the Inspector General, and that position, per the charter, requires an attorney in the role. So, I am of the opinion, I'm still, I'm forming an opinion, and I would love to hear from listeners what you think about this. But I don't think that this office is really worth a damn, and I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to go over some of the questionable situations that occurred in Dallas City Hall just over the last year. And one of them, which I've covered on more thoroughly in a previous episode, was this contract for digital kiosks. So essentially these huge iPad or smartphone looking devices that are going to be installed throughout Dallas, and they're going to be concentrated in certain districts, of course, like downtown, uptown, Oak Lawn. And let's just go ahead. So originally this contract, it was approved over the summer, or I guess back in the late spring in June of 2025. And Kara Mendelson, Councilwoman District 12, expressed some serious reservations about the contract. Here she is.
Through many of these briefings, we've had certain people sitting in the audience. We've had a former council member,
Adam Madrano,
sometimes called a bestie by some of the people around this horseshoe. We've had a dartboard member,
Randall Bryant,
sitting here. And there is no way that they are not lobbying for this. And there's a reason this, while it's not complete, is at this meeting. It's at this meeting so that our outgoing council members can vote on it.
Yeah, the odious Janie Schultz, Omar Narvaez, those kind of people in the City Hall cabal. And another vote came about in December to approve, I think, some of the final details of the contract. And it was ultimately approved for all these digital kiosks and the biggest champion of these digital kiosks was Adam Basildua, who's friendly with all these people who are lobbying, not lobbying. Adam Medrano, Randall Bryant, and others, they took a photo of themselves it looked like the elevator. I don't know if it was in City Hall. That was right after the successful vote for these digital kiosks. And in the caption, it said something to the effect of, "This is 4.5 years of work finally paying off." Let me go ahead and just play the rest of Councilmember Mendelson's comments on this digital kiosk contract.
Everything about this is very suspect, and it has been from the beginning. And as we appoint a new inspector general, I hope that this entire contract will be looked into. Thank you.
And you know what? Maybe it is being looked into and the public is just not aware. But to my knowledge right now, I have no awareness of any investigation of this contract. And here is the city secretary. This is at the same meeting, Billy Ray Johnson. She was asked to comment on the monitoring of lobbying at the city of Dallas.
I'll let if the attorney wants to step in, but if you're lobbying, you're required to report. But there's no monitoring or on our behalf or any monitoring from the city secretary's office on.
Yeah, so it's just the honor system, you know. You're supposed to register, please register, but nobody's going to follow up on it. Nobody's going to check in on it. And I don't really see any monitoring from this Office of the Inspector General on lobbying, as far as I can tell. So I'm not very enchanted with this office. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying that we don't need an ethics watchdog. I'm not saying that at all. And I know that federal agencies, the U.S. Post Office, for example, they have an inspector general, and many other agencies, they have an inspector general. So it's not like this is an out of the ordinary office. But I just don't think that it can be effective. Again, just going back to the people who pay for this office to exist, if they're paying your salary, how authentically critical can you really be of the people who literally pay your salary, have the power to give you a raise, have the power to fire you? Are you really going to be that critical? I don't think so. And look at DOGE, right? Elon Musk blows into Washington, D.C. last year, and I think ultimately over 200,000 federal employees were laid off, fired. Maybe it could have been closer to 300,000. Great. Awesome. He was loathed. He was, I mean, talk about being bullied. And obviously the Tesla share price and car sales took a huge reputational hit. And look what happened if you just happen to lease or own a Tesla. The danger your property was in from these psychopaths. So you're definitely not the most popular kid in the lunchroom if you're in the position of being a formal government paid watchdog. And let me not make a comparison between DOGE and the Dallas Office of the Inspector General, which, as far as I can tell, they have a very weak, unimpressive track record. The gentleman, Bart Beavers, who was fired, and again, he's suing the city for wrongful termination or retaliation, he uncovered 2 or 3 items totaling, I think, under $500,000. And that included a city council retreat that blew the budget by $25,000. And he found a city contract that was not properly bid out, and the city staff and then the city council, they approved a contract that it wasn't sent out for 3 bids. And it turned out that the city overpaid by like over $200,000 potentially for this contract because there was neglect. And I think that the inspector general also found like $700 worth of hotel rooms that were improperly purchased. So for those reasons, I think largely he claims he was terminated because he was doing his job. But again, if the office is properly staffed with $2 million per year worth of personnel, which I'm estimating if you have 11 personnel, including attorneys and full-time investigators in the office, that's about how much it would cost, plus the other budget items. Less than $500,000 in 1 year. Is that really that impressive? And I pulled the quarterly reports for the Inspector General's office. They publish a quarterly report. At least they do that. Now, other than Houston, I don't think any other major city in Texas has this office. And in Houston, from what I could tell, I was digging around, I couldn't find any reporting out of that office, which reports directly to the mayor. And I didn't do a whole thorough deep dive there, but I couldn't find any reports. I couldn't even really find much of a website. But the Dallas Office of the Inspector General publishes quarterly reports, and they're like 15 to 30 pages. And in the reports, they publish basically a summary of all of the complaints that have come in. And by the way, most of what this office is relying on, from what I can tell, is reporting from the public. And many of the reports, they come from city staff. And a lot of it, I would qualify as snitching. Coworkers snitching on each other for, a city staff member is improperly using a city vehicle. I did see one example of that investigated and found to be true. Okay, that's a problem. I'm not saying that doesn't need to be addressed. There was an investigation that it concluded that it was there was truth to the claim that a city cash register was robbed by a city employee. I didn't say what cash register. My mind went to the city store, which is, it's basically like a thrift store for all of the items and goods that are recovered during police investigations or raids. And I don't know what other cash register the city of Dallas has in its possession, but I kind of assumed that. Okay. But most of it was people complaining, city staff, that they got looked over for a promotion or that one of their coworkers got favoritism. And a lot of those, they just got referred to the HR department. And we have a huge HR department that has grown significantly over the last few years in Dallas. So a lot of it is literally like HR issues or issues that city employees should be addressing with their supervisor or manager, and that the Office of Inspector General has no purview over. Some people treat the Office of Inspector General like it's for criminal complaints. And many of these reports that they get, and I call it a snitch line because it's really snitching. You can either call into the snitch line or you can fill out an online report. The vast majority of what that office is doing is relying on the snitching. And I think just in the last quarter, I had like 7 or 8 reports up at once, so pardon me, I'm a little scattered. But I looked at one quarter, I think in 2025. Of the 80 reports, 75% of them were either they were labeled as not related to the city, because that's a huge category of the reports that come in. There are people calling about events in Fort Worth and Lancaster and Irving. I don't know if it's because people are mistaken that they think this Office of the Inspector General is a county position, which it is not. It's just for Dallas proper. Or you have crazies who are reporting, or you just have people seeking revenge. And I'm telling you, go look at these reports on the Office of the Inspector General's website of the Dallas city government. It's petty snitching by and large. And the current Inspector General, the new guy, he claims that he wants to be a more proactive agency, that they're not just relying on the snitching. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm sure. And, most of these reports, again, the vast majority of these reports, whoever goes in and looks at them, they could be quickly dismissed when you see in the report, oh, this is something that happened in Fort Worth. this is something that happened in Irving, or this is clearly a Dallas police matter, and they may tell the complainant, oh, you got to call the police, we don't handle this. I don't think we need 2 more investigators to do basically what a secretary could do. Let me go over a few more examples. These are the quarterly reports. I pulled up a few of them. These are some of the complaints that they are getting. A complaint was received from a resident alleging a city employee made an offhand remark at a public meeting, and the city employee apologized to the resident after the meeting. That was on June 29th, 2025. No full-scale investigation necessary. On July 4th, 2025, an anonymous complaint received from a resident alleging identity theft by an individual who was neither an employee, official, nor a person doing business with the city. So the complaint is not related to the city of Dallas. On July 9th, an anonymous complaint. Oh, that's another thing. Most of these complaints seem to be anonymous, which makes it difficult to follow up and find any more details if needed. An anonymous complaint was received from an individual alleging a request by a supervisor for a city employee to dispose of trash left outside the city building. This complaint does not allege an ethics code violation, and none could be identified. Wow. Yeah, they must be really, really busy over at the Office of the Inspector General. And one of the previous inspectors, Bart Beavers, again, the guy who's suing the city for wrongful termination, he would publish a notable achievements of the Office of the Inspector General during the quarter. He would publish a bulleted list. These are the highlights of what the office has done over a 3-month period, and they go by the fiscal year. I'm just going to read to you. This is the second quarter of 2024, January 1st to March 31st, 2024, right? So about 2 years ago. This is what they were working on. They conducted 14 trainings, including 3 departmental risk assessment meetings for 934 people. And they attended the Black History Month celebration luncheon, filed ethics charges against 1 city employee, okay, delivered 2 management alerts to city manager's office and city council, identifying over $249,000 in unallowable costs. That could have been the contract that didn't properly get bid out by the city staff that I referred to earlier, possibly. Okay, that wasn't the most exciting one. This was the more exciting one. This is when was that? That might have been 2025. That was 2025. Pardon me, I'm skipping around here. This one is the second fiscal quarter of January 1st to March 31st of 2024. Listen to, this is in the top accomplishments. 9 Catch the Canary ethics quiz games played 2,017 times. 2 Ethics Matters newsletters published through employee announcements. Hosted U.S. State Department visitors from Ukraine. Yeah, well, they know a lot about corruption and ethical problems in Ukraine, don't they? I can't find it, but I know I saw there was an item here about having city staff write essays on ethics. Having city staff write ethics essays. That was another one of the accomplishments. So that's what's going on. You know how many investigations were completed in 2025? 18. Is that a lot? Out of over 400 complaints received, 18 merited a completed investigation. So you tell me, because I don't know, I'm leaning toward this is a waste of money. And I understand that, you might think in principle it's a good idea to have a watchdog agency, but you can't have it in-house. Historically, the role of the press, this is why we have the First Amendment. The press is supposed to be performing this function. And I know that we don't have many investigative reporters in Dallas, and I know we don't really have much of a watchdog newspaper or anything like that, and that's a shame, but that's everywhere. And I don't think that the solution to that is bringing in-house and paying with taxpayer dollars an Office of Inspector General. I'm not convinced that that is the best solution, but I'm definitely curious what people have to say. I've floated this on Twitter, and I know that not everybody feels this way. Something to keep in mind is stupidity and incompetence is not necessarily an ethics violation, and we've certainly got plenty of stupidity and incompetence at City Hall and around the Horseshoe. And the way to handle that is you need to vote in better people. We'll see if that happens with this switch to November elections. But I was listening to another local podcast, and maybe I'll end here with a couple of notes. And the host, a former city councilor, attorney, and when the Office of the Inspector General, when it was in discussion that it was going to end up on the ballot to be enshrined in the city charter, he was joking about what a waste of time it was, because he was like, it basically amounts to side work. It's a phony baloney non-job for $210,000 a year. He said he'd be happy to do it. This person had an ethics run-in when he was on the council, so you can take that for what it's worth, if his opinion is worth much on that. Of course, any of these counselors, when an ethics violation has been lobbed at them over the previous year, they claim it's nothing. They're being targeted. It's a witch hunt. It's somebody's just going after me. I don't know. There were the situation with Paula Blackman, Councilwoman District 9, who announced to the public at a city council meeting that she had one of the city's lobbyists now terminated for being feckless. Oh, well, she was able to get an introduction to her state legislator out in West Texas because she needed some help with the property matter. And so thank God for the city lobbyist was able to make an introduction there. Is that an ethics violation? I'm not totally certain, but I would just ask you to think about it. And final note, the public editor of a newspaper, which is, talk about a position that has just been pulverized, but the New York Times, they probably have one of the better known public editors. And you're the watchdog of the newspaper. And they call out sometimes pretty big errors of judgment on newspaper staff. They don't last very long, typically. They don't really last in the role very long. It's a very difficult role to be in, to be an in-house watchdog. It's, I think, a lot more effective when you are outside of the tent and you're able to urinate into it, if you will. Just look at what happened in Minnesota last week or the week before. The 23-year-old with his smartphone just went around videoing what was going on in those Somalian daycare centers. And, I don't think it costs $2 million a year to have that guy go around with the cell phone to expose fraud. But he was on the outside. He was an outsider. He could do what the Republicans inside of the Minnesota state legislature could not. All right. I am Bronin. Thank you for tuning in once again to the Real Texas Radio Podcast. Keep tuning in. Keep listening. Download my back catalog. I've got like 300 episodes. And follow me on X at RTR_Bronin, RTR_Bronin.